Welcome to the Pharmacist Voice Podcast, episode 234. I'm the host, Kim Newlove. My guest today is Dr. LaQuoia Johnson, and we're discussing her book, How Racism Manifests Inside the Small World of Pharmacy. If you're new to the Pharmacist Voice Podcast, welcome. Again, I'm Kim Newlove, the host. I'm a pharmacist by training, but I'm not in clinical practice anymore. I am a voice actor and a podcast host. I graduated from the University of Toledo College of Pharmacy with my BS Pharm in 2001. Among other things, I narrate audiobooks for pharmacists. If you have a project in mind, whether it's an audiobook, medical narration project, or something podcast related, contact me through my website, thepharmacistvoice.com. Here's a little background about my guest, Dr. LaQuoia Johnson, then we'll dive right into the interview. Dr. LaQuoia is an accomplished clinical pharmacy leader. She chose peace over a paycheck, and you'll hear more about that as we discuss her book, How Racism Manifests Inside the Small World of Pharmacy. She transformed her greatest pain into purpose as an educator, speaker, coach, and consultant. She is gifted at creating safe spaces for conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion so that everyone can feel seen and heard and given the opportunity to grow and thrive together. Her mission is to show the world what grace looks like and equip today's leaders with the necessary skills to lead tomorrow's workforce. The legacy Dr. LaQuoia will leave this world is her trademarked grace culture. It's a transformational approach for leading yourself and others from the lens of grace. To learn more about Dr. LaQuoia, read her bio in the show notes for episode 234. That's on thepharmacistvoice.com. Just click on the podcast tab and search for episode 234. You can also go to agraceculture.org. Now, before I roll the interview, I just want to share that LaQuoia and I recorded our podcast interview on Mother's Day of 2023. We are going through some of the same things at the same time. We each had a kiddo graduating from high school and going off to college. And I just wanted to say that pharmacist moms are awesome, especially Dr. LaQuoia. And it was an honor to spend some time with her on this Mother's Day. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. LaQuoia. Hi, Dr. LaQuoia. Welcome to the Pharmacist Voice Podcast. How are you?
Oh, I am doing great, Kim. Thank you for having me. It's Mother's Day, so this is a great day for me.
Awesome. Are you a mother?
I am a mother. I'm a mother of a 17-year-old daughter who is about to graduate. So I'm about to
Yay.
be an empty nester. But it's also a really special Mother's Day for me because my mother spent quite a bit of time in the hospital back in February. So we are just so excited to have her with us because we really didn't know whether we were going to make it to this day.
Well, this is a very special Mother's Day for you. And
Mhm.
again, happy Mother's Day. And thanks for spending some time with me here on Mother's Day, even though this is going to get published in the summer.
Yes, for sure. But thank you for having me. Yes.
Yeah, and I know you're also a dog mom, so there's got to be some like happy dog Mother's Day involved here too. So happy dog Mother's Day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I miss having a dog. But do you want to tell the audience what kind of dog you have?
So I actually have about a 60-pound golden doodle. His name is LeBron. And it just so happens to be that today is his 5th birthday as well. So it's a really, really special day for all of us.
That is awesome. We used to celebrate our dog's birthdays too.
Yes.
All right. Well, hey, I love talking to you about mom stuff and just, being a real person and having a dog and everything. But here's the thing. I have you on this show today to talk about being a pharmacist author. And I know that you're going to inspire my audience to maybe think about authoring their own book, writing their own book. So let's get into the discussion about your book. What is it called?
So my book is called How Racism Manifests Inside the Small World of Pharmacy.
All right. Well, this is a topic that I think is very timely. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that we're all learning about more these days. And thank you very much for talking about your book here on the podcast.
Yes, again, thank you for having me. And you are absolutely right. It's something that we're all growing and learning together. Now that I work in kind of the public health field, they have this phrase where they're saying we're building a plane as we're flying it. And that's exactly what I think is happening with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion as we continue to learn and grow together.
I agree. This is something that I didn't learn about in college. And as somebody who was growing up in the Midwest, it wasn't discussed. So it is my responsibility to educate myself as I fly my plane. I
Right.
need to learn too. Absolutely. So let's get into this. What is the book about and why did you write it?
Well, the book really is about my entire journey of pharmacy. How did I choose pharmacy? Because I did not start out as a child wanting to be a pharmacist. I actually wanted to be a pediatrician and go to medical school. So it really talks about what were those pivotal moments in my childhood, in my education, and in my experiences that led to me choosing pharmacy as a field. But then the book takes a turn where it really talks about my 3 year experience working as a pharmacy leader in a toxic and hostile work environment that initially I didn't believe had to do with racism. It wasn't until about that 3rd year of really the exhaustion and really starting to see things for what it really was that I realized that racism was at the core of the hard experiences that I was facing. So it's really kind of a story about um, resiliency, tenacity, courage, really just being brave and bold. I really wrote the book because I had a lot of pent up resentment and anger that I needed to be able to release and heal. But I also wanted to do it in such a way that it would help leaders create better environments for people that look like me so that they won't have to leave. I think it's when you talk about responsibility, I think it's my responsibility to share my story so that other people who are going through the similar experiences, they're validated. And then also, I share my story so that leaders know what the experience really is, because a lot of times people can't talk about it because of that. I purposely put in my title inside the small world of pharmacy because I believe that is one of the most used microaggressions against people in pharmacy.
Can you share an experience that you had that you included in the book?
Yes, several experiences. I will say that let me think about that because there are a lot of experiences that I could share. And I'm gonna say that one experience I will share, which really for me was the day I say that my soul stood up, was when I was talking to my then manager. We had just returned back from my very first ASHP Pharmacy Leadership Conference. It was held October of 2017. And when we got back, we were sitting in our office and we were talking about some different HR kind of issues, just things that had kind of come up. And in the course of us having this conversation, she says to me, "Well, LaQuoia, I didn't even know you were a human being until we went to Chicago." At that moment in time, I just paused, but something inside of me was like, this isn't right. What was just said was completely off putting, but I didn't know what to say because I had never had anybody question my human existence, never had anybody question whether or not I was a human being. And so I didn't say anything about that at the time because I really didn't know what to say, but it always stuck with me internally. And I would say, it all surfaced in 2020 when a lot of other experiences was having all kind of came together. And when I had those other experiences, it all went back to that first time where my human existence was questioned.
Wow, I have never had my human existence questioned, and I can imagine how that would spark being on the lookout for other experiences. Like, okay, this person did it once. Now I'm looking for a pattern. I
Mhm.
would be on the lookout for a pattern if that happened to me as well.
So I was not on the lookout for a pattern. I really wasn't. I am one of those people that really try to give people the benefit of doubt. It's one of those things being a black woman. we encounter experiences all the time, like on a daily basis. And so I have to, within myself, give people the benefit of doubt. Well, maybe that person is having a bad day, or maybe this happened, you know? And so even when I've shared that story about, my manager saying, well, I didn't know you were human, most people kind of rationalize, well, what do you think she meant? And it's like, I don't know what she meant. But in that moment, there wasn't even really a time for me to even kind of really think about what she meant. And so I wasn't looking for patterns of behavior. Patterns of behavior just started to kind of manifest themselves as time went on. I will say that that was one bookend of my experience that that really didn't even come back up until about 3 years later.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. Are there any other experiences that you want to share that are in the book that might help my audience to understand a little bit about your experiences?
Yes. So one of the other bookends of the experience is another time we were behind closed doors. She used the N word. And, this is one of those times where I talk to people about grace. Um, I gave her grace that first time that it happened. Again, I was shocked. I had never before experienced a white American actually using that word in my presence, and I'm behind closed doors. And so I didn't really know what to say, and especially considering it was coming from the person that was supposed to be leading me in an organization that was award winning for their DEI efforts. I said nothing at that time, but it happened 3 times after that, or it happened 3 times total. The 3rd time that it happened, we were actually in a room, and it was me, my manager, the other supervisor, and our director. No one said anything. Me and the other supervisor were both Black women. My manager was a white female, my director was a white male. It happened. I just kind of sat back, and granted, I'll tell you this, Kim, it wasn't like she called anyone that word, but that word in and of itself it stirs up a different type of emotion for me. I can only talk for myself. It stirs up a different type of emotion. And the fact that my director said nothing and everyone carried on like nothing had happened really told me what environment I was in at that point. I did address it with my both my director and the manager, but when I addressed it with my director, I let him know that this was not the first time that that had happened. And he said, I know. He was like, and I've addressed the other times. When I told him that I'm not quite sure what you mean by that because the other time that it happened, you weren't even here. He wasn't even employed that first time that I was just talking about in the office. I hadn't told anyone about that. So that let me know that this is a pattern of behavior that you already know about that should be addressed, and nothing really ever came of it. I had a conversation with her. Again, there were other circumstances, there were other things that had happened, but those two experiences right then and there really showed me what environment I was in. And I really just feel like at a certain point we are no longer victims, we are volunteers, and I could no longer be a victim because they had already showed me what they were willing to do, what accountability was going to look like in that organization, and it was time for me to start making some decisions of my own.
I am so disappointed to hear that that word was used and nobody even flinched. That is so disappointing. And thank you for sharing that story. I know that can't be easy for you, to talk about, but in the book, when you talk about it, do you make suggestions for how people should handle situations like that where an unacceptable word is used? Would you like to share anything about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my first suggestion in the book where I talk about this particular experience is for people to really start to consider just for themselves personally some of the microaggressive language that they use. right? Because I think it has to start with personal accountability. You have to be aware of your own language and your behavior and how that impacts others. So we have to start first with our own awareness. And so really getting familiar with microaggressive language. What does that look like? What does it feel like? What are the things that you're hearing around you? And so becoming aware of that, number one. Number two is understanding that respect looks different for different people. And so one of the things that I encountered when I did approach my manager about that was that she really didn't feel like she had done anything wrong because she was repeating something that someone else had said. And she literally said to me, because she was repeating what somebody else said, that word was just like using the word penis as an anatomical, like it was an anatomical structure. I just repeated what somebody else said. And so when we talk about what is respect, respect is not what you think respect is. It really is according to that other person. And I had to tell her that that was very disrespectful to me. Even if you're repeating what someone else said, that is very disrespectful. And this is how it makes me feel. And so that I have people really think about, what does respect look like for the other person on the other side? And then to be accountable. When someone says, this is my experience of you, it's not a time for you to start defending either yourself or others. What happens a lot of time for people when they approach a leader and they've had some type of concern or problem with someone else, that leader, in my experience, tries to rationalize what the other person must have meant, what the other person must have said. You must have, not really understood it the way that other person meant for it, because clearly that person didn't mean it like that. And so that personal accountability has to be there. You have to be able to listen to somebody else's experience of you. And then when we're talking about, once you become aware of what's going on around you, you have to have the courage to speak up. I don't believe that we have enough people who have really merged their ethical views, what they say they believe in, with their actual actions and their language. Those two things, if there's no bridge between what you say you believe in and your actions, then you are just out of integrity. And integrity is really keeping your word, keeping the values. And then when you're not able to, saying, hey, listen, I'm sorry. I didn't do what I said I was going to do. I'm not living up to the values that I said I was going to live up to. And then last but not least, and what I've really just taking you through, is the grace framework that I actually introduced in the book. The last thing is equity. Right. And I wrote this book for that equity in education, because you talk about yourself that this is something that I didn't learn growing up. I didn't learn in school. I didn't learn it either in school. I lived it. It's my lived experience. And that's why I wrote the book, because there are a lot of women who look like me and they're suffering in these environments because they can't talk about it. If we start talking about it, then we become the target. We become the angry Black woman. We become the one who, now someone has to walk around on eggshells, so now we have to figure out how we're going to get rid of this person. And that fear keeps so many people silent. I was silent. If people read the book, and I even talk about it in the book, where people would probably say, well, why didn't you just say anything? I did say something. I talked about the experience that I was having up and down the ladder, and nothing was happening. There are a lot of other people who aren't even talking about it. I just happen to be one that's bold enough, and I stand on my morals. I stand on my convictions. Believe in what's right and and really, living
I
what's
appreciate
right,
that. Yeah.
But some people don't feel that way. They feel like, I have bills to pay, so I have to be silent.
I am in awe of you. I think that you are so brave to have said something. And you were talking about all these women who feel like they need to, like you said, walk on eggshells and protect their job. Thank you for speaking up. I myself have the personality where I challenge things that are not right. I believe in justice, but I am still learning. It sounds like everybody has a long way to go. And I love that you were talking about how people need to talk the talk and walk the walk. And you're not seeing the walk, you're hearing the talk, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's
Um,
disappointing.
it's very disappointing. And I would say, Kim, is disappointing on all levels because I can only talk about my experience as a Black woman. My book is my experience as a Black woman, but I've talked to pharmacists all across the board. A lot of people are working in toxic and hostile work environments. It's a lot. It's not just one sector of pharmacy. It is very broad. And so that's another reason why I share my experience, because we need to talk about what's going on, and we need to do something about it, and not just have the lip service of creating another task force or doing another survey. I am so frustrated and exhausted with the surveys and the task force that come out with recommendations and then nothing happens afterwards.
This is a really good point. So I've got to ask you, when it comes to your book, you do explain problems, right? But do you offer the solutions? For example, you're talking about surveys and
Yes.
task forces. Do you propose solutions that actually would help?
Yes. So one of the ways that I wrote the book is such that at the end of every chapter there's a time for you to reflect not only on what came up for you in the chapter. I have a summary at the end. There's a part for you to reflect. There's a part that says change, and it gives you some tips as well. But I would say ultimately what was birthed out of this book was a grace culture. Grace culture is a virtual experience right now that I have created. Is 4 hours of continuing education, and it really helps leaders learn cross cultural communication skills. It gives them a simplified framework and approach for really handling any challenge that comes across their desk. I'm really committed to leadership because that sets the tone for everything. Who is leading and how they lead sets the tone for the entire department. And we have some leaders that are committed to change, and then we have some that aren't. And that's where we are. And I've had to accept that we have some leaders who are not committed to change. But for those that are, I have developed a grace culture, which is personal development for growth minded leaders. It really focuses on you and your personal accountability, because the only person that we can change and control is the person in the mirror. That's it. And so this book was about me doing my work, and then I want to help other people do that same work. So I actually encourage people, get the book, and it could be a book club with you and your coworkers. It could be a book
Great
club for
idea.
your leadership team, because there are
Mhm.
some really great valuable lessons in here for leadership teams to really think about: how would I respond in this situation? There's policy and there's procedure. Yes, we have HR, but at the end of the day, it is how do you respond?
Absolutely. It's all about that walking the walk.
Mhm. Mhm.
I love that you not only bring up the problems, but you also propose solutions. And personal development and growth is so important. And until we all realize that we don't really check the box for DEI, we're not going to do anything about it. So, admitting we have a problem first
Yes.
is the first step, right? And then growing is the second step. And I love that you, again, offer not only an explanation of a problem that you see or multiple problems, but you also propose some solutions and CE. What is this about CE? Is this pharmacist CE or CME? What is this?
So right now the workshop is accredited for pharmacists and technicians. Eventually, I do want to accredit it for all healthcare professionals, but I started with pharmacists and pharmacy technicians because that's where I come
That's
from.
us.
That's
Yep.
us. That's who I know needs this for sure. And so
Mhm.
I invested my own time, energy, and money in getting this accredited for several reasons. One, because I know that we all need continuing education. So why not go ahead and offer it as a bonus to you spending some time with me and understanding not only my experience, but how you are personal accountable for all the people around you. You go ahead and get a little bit of CE for it. I know that would be, a draw. But the other thing around the CE is I know that for some people, they probably wouldn't take the time to sit down and listen and really do some deep personal work without that CE accreditation. I think a lot of us as pharmacists and even pharmacy technicians, we get down the path of continuing education and professional development, and we compartmentalize that away from personal development. But you have to personally develop, you have to grow personally. I mean, that's more important than professionally, is your personal development. Because unfortunately, one of the things that I had to realize is that we don't have to be one thing. No one said that I had to only be a pharmacist or you have to only be a pharmacy technician. You can change your profession. And that was something that I thought I was going to have to do completely. I thought I was going to have to walk away from pharmacy completely after my experience. It just so happens that more doors of opportunity opened up for me. But when people start to personally develop themselves, they get to go in a different direction that maybe they hadn't even thought about before.
Absolutely. Or maybe they can become a more effective team or be part of a team that becomes more effective.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. It can be really hard to talk about the things that nobody talks about. And I definitely think this book is about one of the things that people do not like to talk about, which is
Hmm.
racism and microaggressions. A lot of people don't even know what microaggressions are. Would you
Right.
like to give an example of a microaggression that you've experienced?
Okay. Well, let me start with sort of a simple definition of microaggression. So, microaggression are those subtle snubs or insults, and they're usually directed solely to someone who is part of a historically marginalized group. Historically marginalized, meaning people of color. People who are part of the LGBTQ community. It could be females at sometimes, people with disabilities, and so it's a very large, when I say historically marginalized populations or groups, I want people to understand it's not just people of color. It's a very expansive group of individuals. So some of the, one of the microaggressions that I've gotten most of my professional life is the one that says, "Oh, you speak so well." So I understand that for most people, they intend that as a compliment. But what you have said to me is, LaQuoia, you're a unicorn. I didn't expect someone that looked like you to talk like that. I have never heard someone, a white American, say about another white American that they speak so well. And generally, when I share this experience, then people start to think and they're like, oh, that's right. Or no one refers to another white American as being articulate. That word is generally used when referring to someone else of color and they speak well or they speak the King's English. And that's one of those things that people don't really think about until I bring it up and they're like, "Oh, now I get it." And it's not to feel any shame or guilt about it. It really is to understand microaggressions is to understand your own personal biases and how they show up, how they manifest in your language and your behavior.
Great example. So then on the receiving end, somebody like me who's still learning would then take that information and not comment on the way that you speak. Correct?
So it's not necessarily don't comment on the way that I speak. It would be instead of saying, "Oh, LaQuoia, you speak so well," maybe you might point out something that I said that really resonated with you. I really liked when you made the point about X, Y, and Z. Kind of like what we're doing now, right? Um, you know, you speak so well. What exactly does that mean? Because I was raised in America speaking English just like you.
I can tell.
Right? And so, that's one of it's just one of those subtle digs that we feel on a regular basis. But if you haven't had that lived experience and no one has really pointed it out to you, then you just don't know. And we have to, and I give grace for the fact that some people just don't know what they don't know. And I really feel like that is my purpose. That is what God put me here on this earth to be, is a cultural broker. That's what I now refer to myself is as a cultural broker because of my I have this extreme diverse experience where I really can understand the thought process on so many different sides and how people kind of how we've gotten to where we are. I get it, right? I get it. And so for people who really are trying to grow and develop, I want to support them. I
That's me.
believe that I'm I believe that I am put here. I believe that the journey that I went through, the very painful journey that I went through, was all for the good because it brought me here to a point where now I can be the voice for those people who are voiceless. I can spend some time. That's really what I want to do. Spend some time mentoring and helping other leaders who don't have the lived experience understand how their language and behavior impacts others around them.
Thank you for explaining that. This book is not just a book. This is your life and what you do for a living, right? I mean, some people write a book to be a cathartic outlet, to get something out there, right? Get it off their chest and share it. But your book goes beyond just being a physical book. This is part of your business. Would you like to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, sure. So I will say that when I first wrote the book, it was not anything about a business at all. It really truly was me just like you said, it was kind of like a cathartic project. I wanted to be able to put words on paper, the feelings that I was holding inside, and it really did help a whole lot. But what was birthed out of it was this grace culture phenomenon. So I will tell you, I talked about grace in the book. I introduced grace as a leadership philosophy that I myself had to kind of work through in that environment. It was what helped me get through the environment. After the book, I created the CE, and it really started as a 1 hour CE for an organization. After I did the 1 hour CE, during that time, I was still leading DEI workshops for the organization. The same organization, I left the pharmacy department. I went into the office of DEI, and for a whole year, I led their DEI workshops for both leaders and team members for a whole year. And in that 1 year's time, I made it to the top 100 list of emerging leaders in DEI because they saw my value. They saw that this was really a passion, and it comes out when I'm having these conversations because I really enjoy having the conversations with people that want to learn and grow. And after that experience, that's when I decided, you know what? Let's make it into a 4 hour workshop for with CE credit. I've been doing this for a whole year. I can totally do this, right? And so the book itself was kind of like the foundation of what I've now built into a grace culture.
How did you know when you were successful enough with the book that you could build the grace culture and have the 4 hour workshops and whatnot? I mean, how long did it take? What did success look like for you with this book?
I think it's still a journey for me, Kim. I wouldn't even, when I think about success with the book is really quite interesting because I had the book on Amazon and it is my first book. I have a couple of other projects that I'm now working on, including a devotional. But I pulled it down from Amazon because they actually printed it in a way that I don't really like. You know, us pharmacists, we're type A, we really want things perfect. I bought 100 copies of the book and it has multiple fonts, not only multiple fonts, but multiple sizes of the fonts on one page. I actually found it kind of funny when I opened it because I was like, this is the most diverse book I've ever opened up because they have left no font unturned, right? They've got several fonts up here. And immediately when I opened it, I called my book coach and I was like, hey, like, this is printed incorrectly. The lady who did the editing, she was like, oh no, it should have been this way, so on and so forth. So, needless to say, it wasn't the quality that I wanted to put out into the world. So, I actually pulled them down off of Amazon, and now people can only buy like signed copies from me. And I actually still have quite a few of those books. Here lately, I've actually given them away to a couple of people who have I've had some team members reach back out to me, people that I used to support. And I've actually given them some books. I had a couple people, I did a kind of a push probably about like last October around pharmacy week. But I really haven't been advertising the book to a great extent because I want to really redo the book now that I've had this kind of journey and epiphany and growth, I would say. So when you ask, what does success look like and how did I know? I didn't know. I didn't know that necessarily that like, oh, you've had this amount of success with the book, so now let's do this CE. It was kind of like I did the book. I felt like it was part of my healing journey. I had gotten some things out, and now it was like, okay, now this is the next step. How do you start helping people in a different way?
And you got labeled as one of the top 100 emerging DEI leaders, right?
Mhm.
So that probably fueled you and gave you a nod like you're on the right path. You
Yes.
need to do more of this, right?
Yes. Yes. And I keep
Congratulations on that, by the way.
Yes, I love how you talk about on the right path because I'm a believer. And it's one of those things where for me, I believe God gives me God winks when I'm on the right path. And
Mhm.
he's like, yep, keep doing that, keep going, keep going forward. So when I wrote the book and I wrote out about grace, at no point in time did I say that, oh, I'm going to be a consultant and I want to do this 4-hour workshop. Like that was not in my head at all. It just
Mhm.
kind of was this journey that just kept happening. And now I'm just really elated that I have gotten to where I am. I'm not where I want to be yet. But I respect the journey. I respect the process.
Thank you for sharing all that. I personally find this all fascinating and I love the God wink thing. I feel like when I see things repeat, I feel like I'm on the right path, and it's like God winking at me too, like, keep going, keep going.
Yes, yes, yes.
Awesome. We've got that in common. Now, I should probably get back to the script, so to speak, and talk about this book. You did answer one of my questions, and I want to make sure that I finish the whole question here.
Uh-huh.
Where can my audience buy your book? You already mentioned that you have them in your home. You have a few still printed in all the wacky fonts, the diversity of fonts. But is there any other way that anyone can buy your book?
Yes, they can go to my website, drlaquoiajohnson.com, and there's a link to buy her book. You can do it there. And there's also a graceculture.org. That's where you can find a link to buy my book, but also register for the next workshop.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And when it comes to the workshops are live, right? They're not recorded?
Yes, they are live, they are not recorded, and I don't record them for the reason, I want people to be able to be vulnerable and share their whole self. You will find that it's a really great experience because people are able to talk about things that they haven't talked about before, and they actually get to hear other people's experiences. A lot of times it confirms what other people are experiencing, or it either says it opens other people's eyes to like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that that's what you were experiencing. And especially it's really powerful that we'll have usually pharmacists and pharmacy technicians during the workshop as well, so you get different perspectives.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I know that that is not akin to having an audiobook, but having you personally talk about everything, the content of the book and the grace culture is, I guess it's a second best to having an audiobook. So I just want to
Yes.
commend you for having a live option. Nobody else has that. That's cool. All right. And how are the workshops going?
The workshops are great. I have not done one this year just yet. I would have done one earlier, but as I shared with you, I had to kind of put my life on pause. I'm now a caregiver to both of my elderly parents. Thank God for pharmacy, because if I was not a pharmacist, they would not be alive. So by the time your listeners are listening to this, you said this is going to come out in the summer. I hope to have a new workshop going in July. Next month, my daughter graduates. So I'm going to take the whole month of June off and celebrate. And then starting in July, I will get rolling with about at least one workshop a month. I'm excited to share that at least I believe like one of the first workshops that I do will be for third shift. There's never CEs for third shift workers. So I want to be the CE that is inclusive of those individuals who work third shift.
And this will be on Zoom or literally live in person?
It's on Zoom. I do hope to do some live workshops and work with some organizations to do that, but right now I do it on Zoom so anyone can log in from the comfort of their homes. I want you to be comfortable when you're doing this workshop. This is not a workshop to do while you're at work. Some CEs you can do while you're at work, but no, we are having a conversation. There is a lot of opportunity for sharing and reflecting.
All right. And how can my audience find the workshop?
That is at agraceculture.org.
Thank you. Thank you. I couldn't remember if I asked, so agraceculture.org. I'll put that in the show
Yes.
notes.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Going back to my list of questions here, we talked a lot about how people like me who grew up without DEI, as most people did, they need to learn about this topic. But from you, I want to hear, who do you think the audience for this book is?
When I wrote the book, I really the first audience I really wanted to touch the hearts and minds of were leaders because I feel as though my leaders failed me. My pharmacy leadership team failed me. And it's not because they weren't good leaders. I think one of the mindsets that we all have to shed is this either or mentality. People are either good or bad. People are either racist or not. That's not the truth. There are shades of gray. I believe that you can have good leaders who make bad decisions. You have good leaders who do not know how to respond. Part of me and my giving everybody the benefit of the doubt is to believe in my heart of hearts that my leadership team just didn't know how to respond. So the default was to protect their own. And when I say protect their own, I mean the same manager that I had concerns about, the same manager that I went to HR about and talked to my director about is the person that actually ended up getting promoted, but eventually was walked out for stealing narcotics.
Wow. That's wow. I bet you didn't see that coming.
Didn't see that coming. And
Wow.
that didn't happen until I had already left. I left in September. This came out in May of the following year, May of 2021. And so again, I believe that there are leaders that they can be good leaders, but they're not making the appropriate choices because their default is to go back to their own personal biases around where it's coming from and who is saying what. That is one of my audiences. I really want leaders who really want to change and really want to reflect on their own personal accountability and understand what's happening for some individuals in their department, even though they're not saying it, it's still happening. That's who I want to read the book. I also want people who are like me, who are having these experiences, to feel validated, to know that you're not making it up. There's a lot of times in my head that I thought it was me, or maybe I'm making things up, or, just kind of rationalizing, well, what can I do? What can I do differently? Every time a piece of feedback was brought to me, it was never brought to me in a way that it was such that, oh, well, LaQuoia, this is what you can do. It was always brought to me in some way, shape, or form of criticism. And that only came when I brought up a concern that I was having. That's the only time
Mm.
anything was brought up, right? And so I know this is happening to a lot of other people. And so I want them to understand that they're not alone. And after they read my book, not only will they understand what's happening to them, but also I've created a coaching platform now to help people grow, thrive, and exit the environments that no longer serve their purpose. A lot of times we want to be loyal to organizations that just aren't loyal to us. If you're looking up your leadership and the career ladder and you don't want to keep climbing the ladder, and you don't want to keep growing, it's time for you to find somewhere else where you can grow and thrive. And that's what I did. That's what I had to do. But it was a painful process getting there. So I want people to understand that your feelings are valid, your voice matters.
Oh yeah, there's the V word, voice. I love that
Yes.
word. Thank you for sharing the audience. I understand the two different camps, and I can't help but ask a follow-up question there.
Yes.
You mentioned a coaching program.
Yes.
That's different from the grace culture. Is that
It
right?
is. It is. And it's really hard, Kim, because I know you're a business owner, right? And part of that entrepreneurship journey, everybody is like, well, the riches is in the niches, and you really need to just focus on one audience. But I can't do that. I am a cultural broker. I My purpose in being is to bridge that gap. And so I said in the beginning that there's some leaders who want to change, there's some leaders who want to personally develop. And then we have a host of leaders who really don't care. If there is someone who's working under a leadership team who really doesn't care and you're not seeing changes, I don't want them to be broken like I was. I was so broken. I tell everyone that 2019 was the worst year of my entire life. In
I'm
November
sorry.
2019, I actually thought about taking my own life. That's how bad it was. And and there are people who are at the end of their rope and they feel stuck, whether it's because a lot of times it's the fear of leaving. It's the fear of I've invested all of this time and energy and resources, student loans in a profession. And if I walk out this door, what's next? And I was there for a long time, but it wasn't until it was affecting my mental health and my physical health, and I couldn't find peace that I said, hey, something has to change. And that is me. I have to change. But there's a process. You have to grow through that. And so I want to help people. What I say is grow, thrive, and then exit. You can't everybody can't just quit tomorrow, and nobody should. You have to do some personal assessing of where you are financially, right? Where
Mhm.
you are, like, especially people who have children. You can't just up and quit, but there is a process of where you can grow within that organization. Then you can find a way to thrive, because that's what I did. I grew within the organization. I found my sweet spot to thrive. That's why I left pharmacy, went into DEI, because I was like, this is where I love. I love facilitating. I love teaching. I love having these conversations. So I started thriving there. And then I exited. So I actually left the organization twice, sort of. I left the pharmacy department, and then I left the DEI, Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And when I exited, I was so much better off than I was before, but it was scary. It's scary. And so, that's where I say I have two audiences, because I still am committed to leadership. I'm committed to pharmacy leadership. That is I love the profession of pharmacy. Even though it's been a painful experience, I still love the profession. I teach. I teach pharmacy technicians at two community colleges, because I'm still committed to this profession, even though I've had such a painful experience. But I'm so committed to the profession that I also want to help those individuals who are struggling, who are exhausted, who are at the end of their rope, who may even be considering taking their own life and thinking that there's nowhere else that they can turn, to let them know that there are so many doors of opportunities that can open for you. There is a way that you can leverage your pharmacy skills, all of the skills that you have in so many other areas. You don't have to stay where you're not valued.
Skills are important, and I know we all have skills, but pointing out to people that you have skills beyond what your job title is, pharmacist, and then matching it with the next pharmacist job, you can actually market your skills as you
Mhm.
have found out. And it's really cool to hear about your coaching. And if someone listening to this wants to coach with you, how can they do that?
Go to drlaquoiajohnson.com. That is where you will be able to find everything about me.
Awesome. I will put a link to Dr. LaQuoia Johnson in the show notes so people can just click and go.
Yes. That would be
Awesome.
great.
Now, in case anyone doesn't know if this book is right for them, do you happen to have an excerpt from the book that you could read to us today?
Sure, I would love to read an excerpt.
Thank you.
I am going to read an excerpt from the introduction. I will say, well, it's titled preface here. It's a preface or introduction. I would tell any of my readers, please read the preface before you start in on chapter one, because I was very intentional about how I wrote the preface. So I want to start here. It's actually on page 13, Roman numerals 13 of the preface. And it says, my mission is to help create spaces for courageous conversations. We must face the reality that institutional racism affects all facets of our life. In doing so, here are a few suggestions on how you might use this book. You may want to use this book as a starting point for having courageous conversations with your colleagues and or friends concerning their experiences in the work environment. You may use this book to understand better how to create a more inclusive environment for Black women around you without judgment. If you are a Black woman, you may use this book to validate those feelings you have buried for so long, the behaviors in the workplace you have tried to overlook. This book may be a starting point for your healing journey. Regardless of who you are, what you look like, or what you perceive to be accurate, it's time for us all to forgive past hurts, extend a daily dose of grace, find your voice, and use it. Grace looks like the following for me. The G is for a growth mindset. I approach every challenge as an opportunity to grow. R is for respect. I value every human being's dignity and voice while honoring their contribution to the circle of life. The A is for accountability. I own my faults and will support you in owning yours. The C is for courage. I will take a stand for what is right and use my voice and hands to bring about the change I want to see in my community and the world. And the E is for equity. I will honor all people's lives and ensure I'm using my platform to promote accessibility to essential resources for those members of historically excluded and marginalized groups. I promise you will learn something in this book that will carry you through the rest of your career and hopefully your life. I had to go through a lot to get to this point, but I was growing through it every step of the way so I could be who I was created to be.
Thank you for sharing that. A lot of what you talked about during this interview was actually in there.
Yes.
I I recognized that. Yeah, it's a great preface. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to share it. And yeah, I mean, Kim, I used to hear before I started on this journey that when you find your purpose, it all makes sense. And, when those little cliche things that we'll hear about, work isn't supposed to be hard. When you find what you're really supposed to be doing, it's not work at all. That's exactly how I actually feel daily. Every day I wake up, I am at peace. I have joy. I'm happy. I enjoy what I do every day. It was a journey getting here, but it was worth it.
It sounds like you enjoyed your journey getting to where you are. That's awesome.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
sometimes people say, oh, it was painful, but, I know part of yours was painful, but also you've got all this joy too, which is
Mhm.
great.
Mhm.
I
Yes.
keep getting off topic. Sorry about that. Now, going back to my list of questions here, why should anyone read this book? I think we already covered this, but I'm just going through the list here. Why should anyone read this book?
Why should anyone read it? Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of that. Um, I would say if you just want to grow, if you want to grow, particularly if you are someone who maybe they're like you, Kim, where you're like, I didn't learn a lot about this, and it's my responsibility to know. I think you should read this book. If you are thinking about a career in pharmacy, I don't know, you may have some listeners that are listening. They may be students, they may be pre-pharmacy students, or students who are about to go into their residency programs. I think reading this book will definitely help them understand their language, their behavior, and the impact for others. One of the things that I will say is that AACP came out with a statistic. I think it was about 2020 when the article was published about systemic racism and the pharmacist's role. It said that only 5% of PharmD graduates were from an underrepresented minority group. 5%. So that means that most of your listeners, if they are typically, practicing pharmacists in acute care or retail or so on and so forth, they're not even practicing next to someone that looks like me. So if you've never had the experience and you don't have anyone in your circle that looks like me, then you don't know what's really going on, right? And then you may even be working alongside someone who looks like me, and they don't feel as though they can be truthful about their real experience of you for whatever reason that is. And especially if you're a leader, because people look at you as though you have control over their paycheck, and to a certain extent you do. But that fear is causing a very toxic and hostile work environment. We need to be able to talk about this. People need to be able to share with their leaders, hey, this is my experience. And what can we do to work together to make it a better environment for everyone? When I wrote my resignation letter, which I have actually posted online, people can also find me on YouTube at That Black Pharmacist, because I'm actually unveiling right now. I am unveiling the entire experience that I had when I wrote my resignation letter. I intentionally wrote in there that I am doing this and I am telling you this experience because I don't want anybody else to have to endure what I had to endure for 3.5 years at this organization.
Way to use your voice.
Mhm.
Now, when you were talking just now about why someone should read this book, you talked about students and people that are, early on in their careers. I want to ask, when do you think is the very best time for someone to read this book?
For a student that is considering, particularly students who are considering leadership, they need to read this book before they take their leadership position, before they go into a residency position, um, because it's very important. This book is not just about my experience in pharmacy, it is the total package, the total sum of my experience as a Black person in America. It talks about my childhood and the different steps and the different things that happened to me during that time. And so what we know is a lot of organizations are pushing health equity, as we should. There are a lot of disparities, right? And so some of the experiences that I had are similar to the experiences that your patients are having as well. Patients of
Good
color
point.
are having these experiences in their work environment. And those experiences are contributing to their heart disease, it's contributing to diabetes, it's contributing to a myriad of substance use disorders, mental health disorders. Like, we hold so much internally within us that is manifesting in those physical comorbidities that you're trying to treat with drugs, right? And so I think student pharmacists need to understand how all of that intersects. My daily life on a regular basis, like, I can't even get a manicure without experiencing a microaggression. I experience microaggressions all day long. That is going to show up in your patients as well. And so there has to be some form of empathy there, and understanding that a medication, a pill, does not fix racism, right? And so I would say a student about to graduate or going into a residency program should definitely read this book then. And I do say that I'm committed to leaders, but I want other people to understand this is not just titled leaders, right? Because I believe everyone is a leader. In fact, every pharmacist is a leader by default, because you have pharmacy technicians that you are going to be leading. Whether you are a titled leader or not, you are the leader in that place. And
Mm,
the pharmacy technicians are looking to you. It's your license on the line. And so while I'm a pharmacist, I started out as a pharmacy technician. And I think by far our pharmacy technician group is way more diverse than our pharmacist group, right? And when I talk about that diversity, it is on so many scales: race, ethnicity, socioeconomic diversity. You got educational. It's multifaceted. So in order for you to lead individuals and be inclusive, you need to understand the experience. So understanding my experience is my experience, but it gives you the questions that I ask for you to reflect on, it gives you kind of like some fodder to start asking other people about their experience as well. Because you don't know what you don't know.
I love that phrase. You don't know what you don't know. And
Mhm.
until I read your book, I won't know what I don't know either. That's
Right.
true.
You won't. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's the if you're about to take a titled leadership position, or if you want to see change and you want to understand better, that's when you want to read the book.
Okay. I believe in prevention, preventing problems. And I feel like if young people read this book and then early, okay, if young people read this book early and then revisit the principles often in continuing education or even just getting to know their coworkers more, I think that we can prevent a lot of the microaggressions because we're just going to be aware of the vocabulary and
Mhm.
what it looks like. And we're all, by talking about it, it takes the sting out of it, so that we're not causing these microaggressions towards our coworkers.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think knowledge is power. I know some people disagree with that, but I really believe that knowledge is power.
I do believe that knowledge is power, but the application of knowledge is where we actually get to where everybody can grow and thrive together, because a lot of organizations have done their DE and I pony show, as I say. They pushed out a lot of education. People sat through workshops, they sat through, some type of online training. That doesn't fix the problem though.
The application, I
it's the
love that you
it's
brought up that point.
it's the
Yeah.
application. And that's what makes my experience different. It's not I'm I am going to teach you some new language, new terminology that you may not have experienced before, but this experience is really about you. I don't really delve a whole lot into the history of America. Like you can find that information out on your own. You can Google that stuff yourself. But this is really about, like, if you're in this experience, this is about Kim. This is about Kim examining Kim, because that's what I had to do. Even when I was in that experience, when I was in that hostile and toxic environment, I had to examine myself. And I had to figure out, what do I need to change? How do I need to grow? And when we talk about even preventing microaggressions, it really comes back to, how do I need to grow?
I love what you're talking about because it answers the last question that I was going to ask you, which was what do you want people to do with the information? And I feel like you want them to grow and apply the information.
Yes, I want them to grow. Um, I want them to want to grow, number one, because growth is a choice. You can
I
you
agree.
can remain in your ignorance. you like You don't have to. Some people live in environments where they can stay in a bubble and they don't have to grow. So it really truly is a choice. Understanding your own biases is a choice. I have termed bias as being ignorant and stupid. And if you want to remain there, then that's on you. I can't do anything about that. But if you truly want to grow, I want people to be able to grow with me. I want to be able to support that growth, right? That's what I want people to do. And then by growing, then you can create that environment where everybody can thrive, because everybody deserves the opportunity to thrive and be their best self and bring their best self to work. If I can't be my authentic self where I am, then I'm just stifled in this box. And for so long, I felt like I was in this box. I felt like I had to check these certain boxes and be a certain way, really twisting my whole personality and myself into this pretzel. And it just never was going to work. It wasn't going to work. It wasn't working for me.
You brought up the P word, personality. A lot of people out there have that, what do you call it, the growth mindset. But
Yes.
then a lot of other people have the closed mindset, the, what do you call it, the,
Fixed
oh,
mindset.
fixed mindset. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
And they're like, oh, nope, I know everything I'm ever going to know. I don't need to know that.
Mm-hmm.
I would
Mm-hmm.
say I've got the growth mindset. And I'm glad that you were here today. I have talked to you way longer than any of the other authors because I need to grow. And I know that. And I need to apply what I'm learning.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
thank you for taking the time to talk to me about all the stuff that wasn't even on the list. I learned so much. And your book again, we should wrap this up. Your
Yes.
book again is how racism manifests inside the small world of pharmacy. Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely.
All
And I
right.
wanna give your listeners an offer actually, Kim. So
Yes, please do.
if they register for, a Grace Culture virtual experience, it's 4 hours of CE, and they use the code VOICE 2023, they will actually be able to get it for $20.23. That's 4 hours of CE for $20.23, and that will be available through the end of this year.
Well, thank you so much. And now is that all caps voice
Yes,
or
all caps
okay.
voice. Voice 2023.
I like the price. $20.23.
Yes.
Nice. Nice. All right. Well, thank you for talking to me about your book. And I just want to open up the floor before we totally wrap this up. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Wow, that's a loaded question, Kim, because we've already been talking for quite some time.
I know, but I give everybody the opportunity. And even though you are just a gifted speaker, ma'am, I would like to invite you to speak some more.
Well, actually, when you bring that up, that's really a really good segue to let people know that I am available for speaking events. So if you have your next conference, if you would just like for your leadership team to have any kind of training around that is DEI related, I am available. I actually customize trainings for individuals. So, they can always reach out to me at drlaquoiajohnson.com, schedule a chat, and let me know what your project is. I'm a consultant that does all kinds of things right now.
When you go into business, you have this one idea in mind, right? But then you get requests or you get new ideas. And it sounds like public speaking is an additional offering that you have for your business.
It
Congratulations on
is.
that.
Yes, yes, it is. And I love it. I absolutely love it.
I can tell. And I looked on your website and saw some testimonials. It sounds like your audience loves you too.
Yes, I love connecting with the audience. Again, like if people come and they want to grow, we're going to grow together. That's what we're going to do. And I get to bring my authentic self to the stage wherever I am. This is LaQuoia. This is what you're going to get.
I have grown by talking to you today. Thank you for talking about this very important topic. And I want to encourage my listeners to check out the links. And if you are interested in coaching with LaQuoia or buying the book or anything else, or having her speak at your event, contact Dr. LaQuoia Johnson. Thank you so much for being here on the Pharmacist Voice podcast to talk about your book and so much more. You take care.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Dr. LaQuoia for being my guest on the Pharmacist Voice podcast. I learned a lot from her story and her experiences. Conversations about racism in the small world of pharmacy are important, and she wrote a book about it. Some people may find conversations about racism uncomfortable. I get it. However, I hope that my conversation with Dr. LaQuoia has encouraged you to have a growth mindset, be curious, and seek to understand your fellow man or woman. I want to encourage you to move forward in an inclusive way. The more we all understand one another, especially one another's hearts, the more we can build respectful, trusting, and productive work relationships. If you're interested in learning more from Dr. LaQuoia about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or you want to attend one of her trainings, please reach out and connect. LinkedIn or her website, agraceculture.org, are two great ways to get in touch with Dr. LaQuoia. As we start to wrap this up, I have to admit I am a little sad that this particular episode is over. This was the final interview in my Pharmacist Authors Series, and it was a good one. Plus, it was recorded on Mother's Day, and I can't tell you how fantastic it was to chat with another pharmacist mom on that of all days. If you're a pharmacist mom, whether you have a human child or a furry one, I hope you had a fantastic Mother's Day too. Now, let's wrap this up. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 234 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. Please visit thepharmacistvoice.com to read the show notes. In the show notes, you will find a link to How Racism Manifests Inside the Small World of Pharmacy by Dr. LaQuoia Johnson. You'll also find links to her websites, her social media links, and more. If you know someone who might like this episode, share it with them, especially corporate leaders who need DEI training. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe to or follow the Pharmacist Voice podcast on your favorite podcast player and YouTube to get each new episode right when it comes out. I'll be back on Friday, July 28th with the very last episode in my Pharmacist Authors Summer Series. Just a short episode to wrap up the series. Then I'll be back on my weekly schedule on Friday, August 4th with a drug name pronunciation episode. Thanks for listening today. I'll talk to you on Friday.